The story of the M1911 begins not in a grand hall of strategy, but in a small machine shop where a quiet, stubborn man spent his life turning steel into ideas. John Moses Browning was not merely an inventor. He was a mechanic with a poet's eye for function. He listened to metal the way other men listened to music, feeling vibration, predicting failure, tuning parts until they moved together like a well-rehearsed ensemble. At the close of the 19th century, that ear for engineering mattered more than rhetoric. Armies had just discovered what a single superior small arm could do to a battlefield. In America's painful lesson from the Spanish-American War, U.S. troops armed with outmoded weapons were outclassed by opponents carrying modern, clip-fed Mausers. The embarrassment left a clear instruction: design a new service pistol that would never fail a soldier in the field. Browning took that instruction personally. He set out to solve a problem that had haunted firearms designers for decades: how to combine stopping power with repeatable reliability in a handgun small enough to be carried on a belt. Early experiments with automatic pistols traded power for complexity, or sacrificed accuracy for rate of fire. Browning's approach was pragmatic and unapologetically conservative. Build no exotic miracles, only a better mechanism. He favored short recoil, a system in which the barrel and slide move together a short distance under recoil. Then the barrel tilts and unlocks, allowing the slide to continue rearward to extract the spent casing and chamber a new round. It was elegant because it used physics rather than precision timing to control the sequence of actions. It tolerated dirt and wear because large parts moved over generous surfaces rather than depending on microscopic tolerances. Equally important was the choice of cartridge. Browning paired his mechanism with a round that would not be polite about its purpose. The .45 ACP had been developed after American military testers determined they needed a projectile that could stop a charging man under the stress of battle and through heavy clothing. The .45 pushed a heavy, relatively slow bullet with blunt, crushing energy, not subtle but brutally effective at close ranges. This decision reflected Browning's operating principle: reliability first, power second. Choose a cartridge that solved the human problem, stopping an enemy, and then design a mechanism that would deliver it without fail. The pistol that emerged from Browning's shop at the turn of the century was not pretty in a decorative sense, but it was honest. The slide rode on rails that could be machined repeatedly. The barrel locked into the slide with a robust locking lug. The extractor and feed ramp were simple, proven shapes. Browning paired the short recoil action with a single-action trigger that let a trained soldier break a shot with surgical crispness. He added two safeguards that would become hallmarks of the design: a thumb safety on the left side of the frame and a grip safety built into the backstrap. The combination meant a pistol could be carried ready but not dangerous in the hands of a careless user, a sober answer to the problem of accidental discharges that had plagued earlier designs. Trials followed trials. Browning refined. Colt and Springfield argued about production, and the Army tested with an engineer's impatience and a soldier's fear. The pistol went through endurance runs, temperature extremes, and the sort of abuse a service weapon must survive: sand, mud, repeated impact, and thousands of rounds down the bore. Time and again, the prototype returned to the firing line with only minor adjustments. What impressed testers was not a single feature, but a coherence. Each part seemed chosen to support the others. The short recoil system tolerated fouling. The heavy slide absorbed energy that might otherwise have ruined springs. The ergonomics of the grip made the heavy .45 manageable for follow-up shots. When in 1911 the U.S. Army formally adopted Browning's design as the model of 1911, it was less the triumph of a patent than the triumph of a thesis. A military firearm must be judged by its failure rate under the worst conditions, not by cleverness on a clean bench. The M1911 would carry that doctrine into wars the designers could hardly imagine. Early adopters found the pistol reliable in rain and cold. Officers who trusted it in their holsters praised its trigger and balance. Yet even as the gun began its official service, Browning and military engineers did not remain idle. Continuous improvement led to the M1911A1. tweaks to the grip, changes to sights, and other small refinements that made the pistol easier to handle and produce in volume. Those small steps were crucial. They moved the M1911 from a brilliant prototype into a platform that could be manufactured in the thousands without losing the qualities that made it exceptional. The M1911's design philosophy also hinted at a deeper American confidence in industrial processes. Where some European builders prized lightness and mechanical showmanship, Browning and his manufacturers emphasized robust, repeatable machining and heat treatment regimes that ensured every slide and barrel behaved within known limits. Quality control became a force multiplier. A pistol that left the factory with known tolerances would not betray its user in the field. The synergy between Browning's design and American manufacturing meant the 1911 was not a one-off miracle, it was a reproducible advantage. By the time the Great War made mass mobilization an industrial project, the M1911 had already proven itself in the hands of Marines and soldiers. It was a handgun that could endure mud and sweat, one that would keep firing when other pistols stopped. In quiet workshops and noisy proving grounds, in the hands of engineers and enlisted men, a consensus formed. The 1911 worked the way a combat pistol should work. It did not promise elegance, it promised results. In the decades to come, that promise would make captured specimens remarkable to foreign engineers and eventually influential across the world. But in 1911, it was simply a solution built from steel, sweat, and a refusal to accept failure. When the M1911 entered full-scale production, it carried with it not just John Browning's genius, but the industrial heartbeat of a nation. Unlike many European pistols of the era, which were hand-fitted by artisans, the 1911 was designed from the beginning to be machined, assembled, and replaced part for part without needing a gunsmith's file or touch. It was a machine-age weapon for a machine-age war. Every line of its frame and slide reflected a philosophy new to its time, that precision was not an act of craftsmanship, but an act of repetition. Colt's Hartford factory and the U.S. government's Springfield Armory became the twin forges of this vision. Inside the vast brick halls, the rhythmic thunder of milling machines filled the air. The scent of cutting oil and carbon steel mixed with the heat of thousands of motors turning day and night. Each 1911 was carved from solid forgings of ordnance steel, heat-treated to withstand the relentless recoil of the .45 ACP cartridge. Engineers specified tight tolerances, but not so tight that grit or mud could cripple the action. The result was a pistol that balanced precision with practicality, a rare feat in any era. Every piece had a purpose. The slide, machined from high-carbon steel, housed the recoil spring and firing pin assembly, moving backward under pressure with the barrel before unlocking. The barrel was forged, bored, and polished to a mirror finish, its locking lugs cut to exact angles that mated perfectly with grooves in the slide. The frame, the pistol's backbone, was milled with painstaking care so that a slide from one 1911 could fit another without custom fitting. The trigger was single action and crisp, breaking at roughly 5 pounds of pull, but, more importantly, consistent. It was a trigger meant for soldiers, predictable, simple, and trustworthy. But what astonished ordnance inspectors was not beauty or elegance, it was repeatability. Colt's manufacturing process was revolutionary for its time. Workers could assemble a gun from parts drawn at random from separate bins, and the final weapon would still pass inspection. That level of interchangeability had been achieved in rifles before, but almost never in handguns, where precision machining was notoriously difficult. The 1911 changed that standard forever. During World War I, production skyrocketed. The Colt and Springfield lines pushed out thousands of pistols per month, each one tested before shipment. Every 1911 fired 21 rounds before it was accepted, 7 to test function, 7 for accuracy, and 7 for endurance. If any malfunction occurred, it was torn down, inspected, corrected, and retested. Soldiers on the Western Front carried these pistols through rain, mud, and the stench of gas, and found them reliable companions. They were not delicate instruments. They were, as one Marine officer described them, a fist of steel that fires when you squeeze. After the war, the 1911 underwent small refinements. The M1911A1, adopted in 1926, introduced a shorter trigger, a relief cut behind the trigger guard, and a slightly arched mainspring housing, all ergonomic improvements to fit a wider range of hands. The sights were raised and squared to allow faster acquisition. Nothing fundamental was changed, because nothing fundamental needing changing. The pistol's reliability had already entered legend. It would chamber and fire rounds even after being dropped in mud, doused in oil, or frozen solid. When kept clean, it would shoot tens of thousands of rounds before any part wore beyond tolerance. In the interwar years, the 1911 also became a testing ground for American machining itself. The weapon was used by ordnance engineers as a benchmark for consistency. If your factory could make 1911 parts that fit military standards, you could make anything. Each piece embodied not just engineering, but identity, the American belief that machinery, properly designed and maintained, could outlast any human frailty. By the late 1930s, as Europe once again spiraled toward war, the United States quietly began to rearm. The 1911 A1 was back in full production. Colt, Ithaca, Union Switch and Signal, Remington Rand, and even Singer Sewing Machine Company joined the effort. The assembly lines multiplied like arteries. 5 companies, 1 design, 1 standard. Inspectors from the Ordnance Department roamed from factory to factory with gauges and blueprints, ensuring every hammer, pin, and slide conformed to the same tolerances. This coordination across industries, from sewing machines to typewriters, was more than mobilization. It was a demonstration of faith in precision. Each finished pistol was a quiet masterpiece of applied engineering. Soldiers opening crates overseas saw rows of black steel gleaming under cosmoline. The weapons lines were simple but purposeful. The extended beaver tail to protect the hand, the broad ejection port, the thick, reassuring slide. When they racked the slide, they could feel what German engineers would later admire: a smooth, mechanical confidence, the perfect marriage of strength and balance. Unlike many European pistols, the 1911's action did not depend on delicate tolerances or polished fits. Its surfaces were broad, its springs strong, its recoil cycle forgiving. A bit of mud or grit would not stop it. That was deliberate. Browning and Colt had understood something most designers missed. A weapon for war must be designed for neglect. Even during early testing of captured examples years later, German ordnance engineers would note this philosophy with something like awe. To them, the machining seemed crude, the slide cuts wide, the grip safety large, and the tolerances looser than a Luger or a Walther, yet the weapon never jammed. They would come to understand that this crudeness was a form of intelligence, a deliberate balance between precision and play that let the pistol survive dirt, fouling, and wear. By the time America entered World War II, over 250,000 1911 A1s had already been produced. The pistol had become more than a sidearm. It was a statement of national character. Heavy, direct, and relentless, it embodied the same traits as the men who carried it. When soldiers landed in North Africa in 1942, they carried with them a weapon born 30 years earlier, yet still unmatched. In an age when new machines came and went, the 1911 endured not through novelty, but through perfection of purpose. Its reputation traveled faster than its bullets. German soldiers who captured one during those early campaigns were often baffled by its simplicity and solidity. Compared to their P-08 Lugers, intricate, elegant, but prone to failure in sand or cold, the American pistol looked primitive. Then they fired it, and the surprise began. The slide cycled like a piston. The recoil was deep but clean. The safety mechanisms worked intuitively. It was not a pistol made for ceremony, it was made for war. In workshops far from the front, engineers would soon take those captured specimens apart, measuring every curve, inspecting every spring. They would realize with reluctant admiration that they were holding something extraordinary. A piece of machinery from another philosophy, one that valued reliability over refinement, function over flair. And that realization in 1943 would mark the beginning of a quiet respect and a long-lasting influence that would echo across decades of firearm design. In 1943, amid the chaos of a war stretching from Stalingrad to Sicily, a small crate arrived at a German ordnance testing facility outside Dresden. Inside it lay several captured American pistols, taken from fallen or captured U.S. officers during the fighting in North Africa and Italy. Among the expected spoils, M1 carbines, Garands, and Colts of various models, one weapon drew immediate attention: a compact, heavy, dark pistol marked Colt Automatic Caliber .45. The engineers gathered around it with curiosity. To them, it was an old design, a relic from 1911, a weapon of another era. But when they began to examine it closely, their skepticism turned to fascination. The Wehrmacht's Waffenprüfungsamt, the German Army's ordnance testing office, had seen hundreds of foreign small arms by that point in the war. They were meticulous men, steeped in the tradition of precision. Their pistols, the Luger P08 and the newer Walther P38, were considered masterpieces of engineering, products of a nation that equated tight tolerances with technical superiority. Yet the more they studied the Colt M1911, the more they realized it came from a completely different school of thought, one that seemed primitive on the surface but revealed brilliance underneath. The initial German report described it as a strange pistol, built like a tool rather than a firearm. The metalwork was not delicate, it was muscular. The machining lines were visible, the edges blunt. But as one engineer noted, every surface that must be smooth is smooth. Every surface that may be rough is left so. There is no waste of perfection. That sentence, scribbled in the margins of a captured weapons analysis sheet, summed up their growing respect. They disassembled the weapon piece by piece, laying its components on the examination bench. There were no fragile linkages or tiny pins that could vanish into the floor. Each part seemed designed to survive abuse. The short recoil system, in which the barrel and slide moved together before the barrel dropped to unlock, intrigued them immediately. Unlike the toggle lock mechanism of the Luger, which demanded cleanliness and precise machining, the Browning system was self-cleaning. It could function with dirt, carbon, or even light rust. When the slide was cycled by hand, it moved with a heavy, confident glide, not refined, but unstoppable. Next came the trigger mechanism. The Germans were used to pivoting triggers and complex double-action systems. The M1911's straight-back single-action trigger was shockingly simple, a short, direct press that released the hammer with surgical crispness. They measured its break weight at around 5 pounds, consistent across repeated tests. One ordnance officer noted with surprise, "The trigger does not creep. It breaks cleanly, without drag, a sign of superior geometry." That observation impressed them perhaps more than any other feature. In German engineering culture, consistency was the highest compliment. The safety systems baffled them at first. The combination of a thumb safety, grip safety, and half-cock notch seemed redundant, almost excessive. But when they tested the weapon under stress, cocked, dropped, struck, they found it would not fire unless deliberately intended. The Americans have built a soldier's pistol, safe in the hand, safe in the holster, and deadly in use. To men accustomed to the finicky toggles of the Luger or the intricate decocker of the Walther, this straightforward reliability was almost alien. After the mechanical inspection came the live fire tests. At a range outside Kassel, German testers loaded the heavy .45 ACP cartridges with a mix of curiosity and caution. The first shot startled them, not for its accuracy, but for its power. The pistol recoiled with authority, a deep, slow pulse rather than a sharp snap. It stayed on target, the slide slamming forward like a piston. At 25 meters, the big American bullets tore clean holes through steel helmet plates that 9mm rounds merely dented.
The projectile's wounding effect is catastrophic, one test report stated bluntly. The weapon's grouping was tight, within 50 millimeters at 25 meters, more than acceptable for a combat sidearm. When fouled with mud, the pistol still functioned. When dusted with sand, it still fired. The testers intentionally over-lubricated it with heavy oil, then ran it dry. It cycled every time. One frustrated officer watching the gun refuse to jam muttered, "It wants to fight." They had never seen such mechanical forgiveness. Back at the laboratory, the ordnance team compared the Colt's parts with those of their own pistols. The Luger P08, with its beautiful toggle lock, required over 700 machining operations to complete. The Volther, even though simpler, still demanded intricate fitting. The Colt, by contrast, used broad surfaces and simple geometries that could be milled quickly and assembled with minimal hand fitting. One German machinist noted that it could be mass-produced without losing function, something the precision-obsessed German factories struggled with as the war dragged on. "He have built a pistol for factories, not for craftsmen, and yet it works better than ours." Even more surprising was how modular the weapon was. The slide from one captured specimen could fit the frame of another. The parts were fully interchangeable, a concept so routine in American arms production that few soldiers thought twice about it, but one that astonished German technicians used to individually fitted pieces. It was here that they began to realize the larger truth. The 1911 was not just a pistol, it was an industrial philosophy made flesh. The final ordnance report, circulated in late 1943 under the title Beurteilung einer amerikanischen selbstladenden Pistol Kaliber 45, Evaluation of an American Self-Loading Pistol Caliber 45, concluded with unexpected respect. The mechanism demonstrates a clear understanding of mass production and soldier-proof operation. Its tolerances are intentionally generous, its operation positive, and its safety systems reliable. The weapon may lack elegance, but it cannot be denied technical foresight. Some officers dismissed the praise, clinging to their pride in the Luger's artistry or the P-38's cleverness. But among the younger engineers, those who understood that the war would be won by industry, not artisanship, admiration turned to envy. They saw in the 1911 not just a weapon, but a prophecy, a glimpse of post-war firearm design philosophy that valued reliability above all else. In the closing months of 1943, several captured M1911s remained on the tables of German research centers. Their surfaces were worn, their finish dulled, but they had earned respect in the most unlikely of places, in the laboratories of the enemy. Some engineers suggested adapting its recoil spring design or its dual safety concept into future pistols. Others simply kept the weapon as a curiosity, a symbol of industrial pragmatism. One final line in a handwritten report summarized the collective realization: this weapon is not of 1911, it is of tomorrow. They were right. Long after the Reich that studied it fell into ruins, the design they had underestimated would continue to fire, unchanged, unbroken, and still decades ahead of its time. If German engineers studied the M1911 in sterile laboratories, German soldiers met it in the dirt, smoke, and terror of real battle. In North Africa, Italy, and later France, the weapon's reputation spread not through documents, but through gunfire, through the distinct, heavy bark of a .45 pistol echoing across the dust and rubble. To most Wehrmacht infantrymen, the first encounter with the American sidearm came as shock, not analysis. They had grown up trusting the Luger P08, an elegant, slim 9mm pistol with a precise toggle lock action. It looked like a surgeon's instrument, sleek and mathematical. But in the chaos of battle, that elegance became fragility. When the fine sand of Tunisia worked into its mechanism, it seized. When mud splashed from Italian rain-soaked trenches, it jammed. The M1911, by contrast, shrugged off conditions that silenced the Luger. Reports from German front-line units in 1943 and 1944 tell a quiet story of astonishment. Captured pistols taken from fallen Americans were often tested immediately. In an after-action note from a Panzer Grenadier regiment near Cassino, an officer wrote, "The American pistol is large, heavy, and crude in appearance, yet it shoots powerfully and without failure. Its recoil is strong, but manageable. The weapon continues to function even when wet or fouled with dirt. Ours do not." In another account from Sicily, a German paratrooper, Obergefreiter H. Kraus, described how his squad had seized an American officer's gear during a nighttime skirmish. Among the items was a Colt M1911A1, still warm with half a magazine left. Kraus fired it experimentally the next morning and noted in his diary, "The barrel moves strangely when fired, and the slide feels slow like a machine part from a vehicle. But the power is astonishing. The round makes holes in metal cans that my .08 only dents." That realization, that the American sidearm was designed not for finesse but for dominance, began to change how the enemy viewed it. The .45 ACP round was not fast, but it was heavy. It transferred nearly all its energy to the target. A hit to the torso could knock a man down, even if not instantly fatal. German medics in Italy nicknamed it Der Hammer, the hammer, because of the way it dropped soldiers at close range. It was not uncommon for wounded troops to describe being hit by a small cannon. The difference in impact between 9mm and .45 ACP was not theoretical. It was felt in bones and muscle. The M1911's behavior under stress fascinated those who handled it. It could be cocked, carried, and fired with a simplicity that made sense in combat chaos. There was no decocker to manipulate, no toggle to fuss over, just a safety, a grip, and a trigger. The grip safety, initially seen by German engineers as redundant, became a point of admiration among captured weapon analysts once frontline troops began to describe how effectively it prevented accidental discharges. Even under adrenaline and exhaustion, soldiers could trust the weapon not to fire unless they meant it to. German officers, usually quick to criticize enemy equipment, began issuing pragmatic acknowledgments. In one captured field report dated March 1944 from the 1st Parachute Division, an Oberleutnant wrote, "It is understandable why the Americans favor this weapon. It is reliable beyond expectation, simple to maintain, and its cartridge is of remarkable effect. Our own pistols require care and cleanliness that are rarely possible in battle. This Colt pistol seems designed for neglect." This was the heart of the revelation. The 1911 wasn't built for perfection. It was built for imperfection. It was built for mud, fear, fatigue, and the trembling hands of soldiers who hadn't slept for 3 days. When American GIs were asked about their sidearm, their responses were rarely technical. To them, the 1911 was just there, a quiet, reassuring weight on the hip. It fired when needed, it didn't jam, and it hit hard. Infantrymen carried it in canvas holsters darkened by sweat. Aviators kept it in shoulder rigs, and tank crews stored it under seats. It wasn't glamorous like the Thompson or the Garand, but to those who used it, it was something almost sacred, the weapon of last resort that never failed. In the jungles of the Pacific, Marines carried it through mud, blood, and humidity that would kill most mechanical systems. They dunked it in rivers, dropped it on coral, and still it fired. "You can drown it, and it'll cough up a bullet anyway," wrote one corporal after Guadalcanal. When Japanese soldiers charged through the darkness screaming "Banzai," the heavy crack of a .45 often ended the charge in an instant. The Colt had no elegance there, only survival. In Europe, the pistol became a symbol of American directness, functional, rugged, and unpretentious. German troops noticed that U.S. officers and NCOs often carried their 1911s openly, not as status symbols, but as tools. A Wehrmacht prisoner interrogated in Normandy commented almost admiringly, "The Americans treat their pistols like we treat our shovels.
Useful things, not treasures. Field comparisons soon found their way back to the laboratories. Engineers began to correlate combat reports with test data. The Luger, though legendary, was too sensitive for trench conditions. The Walther P-38, introduced as its replacement, solved many of those issues but remained more mechanically complex and required cleaner ammunition. The M1911, on the other hand, seemed almost indifferent to care. German testers discovered that its looser tolerances allowed dust and powder fouling to escape rather than bind. Its recoil spring was heavy, but perfectly tuned for the .45 cartridge, cycling even weak or dirty rounds. Its feed ramp was mirror smooth, guiding cartridges with unerring reliability. When compared side by side, the philosophical divide between the two nations' weapons was stark. German pistols were precision instruments. The American Colt was a tool built to endure abuse. One was designed for controlled conditions, the other for chaos. The Germans realized, too late, which philosophy belonged to the future. By 1945, the Colt had earned a fearsome reputation. German soldiers learned to recognize its sound, a slower, deeper report than the sharp crack of 9mm fire. In ruined French towns and forests, that sound meant one thing. An American officer or paratrooper was close, and death was near. "The man with that pistol does not miss," one captured German private said after the fall of Aachen. "We can hide from rifles, but not from that sound." For the Americans who survived, the M1911 became more than a weapon. It became a bond between soldier and engineer, between the hands that forged it and the hands that fired it. Its simplicity gave it a kind of soul. In foxholes, pilots' cockpits, tank turrets, and bomber planes, men who had never met John Browning nonetheless trusted him with their lives. The Germans had measured the 1911 with calipers and gauges, dissected it on benches, and admired its machining. But in the end, the true revelation came not in laboratories, but on the battlefield. In every muddy trench where a pistol fired when it had no right to. To the men who fought against it, the 1911 was a problem they could not engineer away. To the men who carried it, it was proof that a well-made machine could become something more. A companion, a last defense, and a testament to a design that understood war better than any blueprint ever could.
When the war ended in 1945, the ruins of Europe were littered with the debris of industrial empires. Rifles twisted by fire, tanks split open, aircraft reduced to aluminum skeletons. Yet one machine emerged from that destruction, not as scrap, but as a standard. The Colt M1911, the old American warhorse, had outlasted the Reich, the Empire of Japan, and even many of the weapons built to defeat them. German engineers, who once examined it under bright laboratory lights with skepticism and surprise, now quietly acknowledged what they had learned. Its design was not of the past. It belonged to the future. In the post-war years, captured weapons found their way to research centers from Munich to Moscow, from Bern to Tokyo. The Allied control commissions allowed ordnance specialists to study whatever remnants they found useful. Among those relics, the M1911 became a blueprint of simplicity and resilience. Engineers who had spent their careers chasing perfection through complexity began to see the wisdom of John Browning's doctrine. Make it simple, make it work, then make it beautiful only if there's time. The influence spread subtly but unmistakably. In Switzerland, the SIG P210, one of the most precise pistols ever made, borrowed from Browning's short recoil tilting barrel system. In the Soviet Union, designers of the Tokarev TT-33, themselves students of earlier Browning prototypes, refined their understanding of feed geometry and locking lugs based on lessons learned from captured 1911s. In Germany itself, the post-war Walther engineers, rebuilding their factories in Ulm, began to adapt elements of Browning's simplicity into their future designs. The DNA of the 1911, its balanced recoil, its intuitive controls, its philosophy of mechanical honesty, ran like an invisible thread through the firearms of the next century. But the greatest testament to its genius came not from factories, but from soldiers. While new pistols emerged, the United States never truly replaced the M1911. Through Korea, Vietnam, and into the Cold War, its heavy steel frame continued to ride in the holsters of Marines, aviators, and special forces. It had become more than a service weapon. It was a ritual object, a symbol of reliability in a world where everything else had changed. Those who carried it spoke of it with reverence. "It doesn't care who you are," one Marine sergeant said during the Korean War. "If you respect it, it will save you. If you neglect it, it'll forgive you once." Its balance of weight and recoil gave shooters confidence. Its single-action trigger allowed precision in moments when adrenaline made fine motor control impossible. And its recoil, that deep, rolling shove, reminded soldiers of the sheer physicality of survival. In post-war Germany, a few surviving engineers who had examined the M1911 in 1943 later helped design civilian and military sidearms for the Bundeswehr. Some admitted that their exposure to the Colt had changed how they thought about weapons entirely. "It taught us humility," one engineer recalled decades later. "We realized that perfection in the workshop means nothing if the soldier's hands are shaking, if his weapon is dirty, if his world is chaos. The American pistol was built for that chaos." That realization marked a turning point in firearm design worldwide. Post-war pistols gradually abandoned delicate, hand-fitted tolerances and embraced mass-producible resilience. Stamped parts, simple safeties, modular grips all echoed Browning's logic. Even the emerging polymers and alloys of the late 20th century, used in guns like the Glock or the Sig Sauer series, followed the same principle: reliability first, power second, simplicity always. The spiritual lineage led straight back to that old, blued steel sidearm first approved by the U.S. Army in 1911. The 1911 also transcended its mechanical purpose to become a cultural icon. In the United States, it represented both craftsmanship and practicality, the blend of innovation and discipline that defined American industry at its peak. On movie screens and in museums, it became the visual shorthand for the American fighting man, square-jawed, calm, unbreakable. Veterans kept theirs long after service, not as trophies, but as reminders of moments when the world balanced on the press of a single trigger. Collectors and gunsmiths in the decades after the war treated each Colt not just as a weapon, but as a manifesto in metal. Gunsmiths marveled that a design from the early 20th century could accept improvements, adjustable sights, new grips, match-grade barrels, without ever needing fundamental change. Unlike most firearms, the 1911 did not become obsolete. It evolved. And beyond the workshops and ranges, in boardrooms and design studios, engineers from other industries often cited it as an example of enduring perfection. The automobile designer Carroll Shelby once said that the Colt 45 is the V8 of pistols, powerful, simple, timeless. Architects studying industrial minimalism used it as a case study in functional aesthetics. Even aerospace engineers admired its mechanical efficiency. Every gram of steel earned its place. And meanwhile, in the shadows of Cold War Europe, where former adversaries now shared technology, quiet tributes emerged. In the archives of the Bundesarchiv Militar, an old ordnance report from 1943 remained filed under Captured Foreign Weapons, USA. The final line, written in careful Gothic script, reads, "This pistol is of primitive appearance, but superior spirit. It achieves with simplicity what our designs achieve only with effort. Future weapons should learn from it." That single line, born of reluctant admiration, foreshadowed the design revolution that followed. By the late 20th century, more than 70 nations had adopted pistols directly inspired by Browning's system. Even as alloys replaced steel and computers replaced blueprints, the heartbeat of the 1911's mechanism endured. The short recoil cycle, the single-action precision, the balance between safety and readiness, all became permanent fixtures in modern small arms design. When the U.S. military finally phased out the M1911A1 in 1985, replacing it with the Beretta M9, thousands of veterans refused to let it go. Some bought civilian versions, others kept their issued pistols locked in footlockers as relics of trust. And yet, even after its official retirement, the M1911 refused to die. Special operations units quietly kept it in service. Competitive shooters rebuilt it for precision. Gunsmiths handcrafted versions in stainless steel, titanium, and even polymer. Each new generation of weapons arrived, lighter, cheaper, more modular, yet none replaced the soul of Browning's original creation. Today, more than a century after its birth, the 1911 stands not just as a weapon, but as a philosophy cast in steel. That true engineering endures not by being new, but by being right. It is the rare machine that earned respect from both the men who used it and the enemies who faced it. The Germans who once disassembled it in 1943 saw in its steel a paradox: simplicity that concealed genius, brutality that masked grace. And perhaps somewhere in a dim museum drawer in Bavaria, a worn 1911 still rests, its slides scarred from wartime tests, its grips faded smooth. To the untrained eye, it is only an old pistol. But to those who understand, it is something far greater. A fragment of the 20th century's soul. A reminder that great design doesn't chase time, it survives it.